This is Synthesis TV, keeping you on the edge of technology and business.
A very good day to you. I'm Howard Feldman, and this is Synthesis TV. Joining us in a studio today is Bronwyn Williams. Now, it's a very interesting thing because you're an economist, an analyst, a trend analyst, and a futurist.
Yeah.
Now, I always thought economists were brilliant at sounding brilliant because they looked back, not forward. You've made yourself a little vulnerable by saying that you look forward as well. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, I quite like the joke that I like to say. Like, I'm a trained economist, but I practice as a futurist. And the grand irony is that economists spend their time actually predicting the future, making forecasts, right? Whereas futurists kind of don't. The whole role there is to look at foresight rather than forecasting. Your foresight is going wide and broad rather than zeroing in on what's likely to happen.
Yeah.
So the other joke with futurists is that if you do your job right, you're always going to be wrong, right? The whole point is to kind of be like a contemporary prophet and warn people of their mistakes and change
biblically, a prophet was there to warn people so that it didn't happen.
Exactly.
So that the predictions didn't happen. So a successful prophet was always wrong.
Correct. That's us.
It's a brilliant business to be in.
It's perfect, isn't it? It's much more fun than the actual economics, right?
Except you don't really walk through this. You walk through the town telling people to mend their ways, or do you?
Well, we kind of do. I think a lot of us are sort of basically doing that, right? You're saying this is what's likely to happen, but this is, but we can also change course if things don't work out. But you're absolutely right to say that economists do, although economists do predict the future and do things like forecasts, they are basing those forecasts back on retrospective data, right? And we all know like past performance is no guarantee of future success. But the other sort of grand irony is that the very act of creating those forecasts actually changes the future too. So you've kind of got this huge responsibility when it comes to making predictions and pinning numbers down as to what's likely to happen. And it's not nothing metaphysical about that at all, but our expectations literally shape our reality. If we expect recessions, we take different actions with our personal and business finances than we would if we're expecting growth cycles,
and
right?
therefore bring it into
self-fulfilling prophecies.
Bring life to it.
Like the great toilet paper crisis, you know?
Of 2020.
Yes, self-fulfilling prophecies, right? We create our own reality. If we want and expect toilet paper shortages, that's exactly what we get.
Of course, it is. Yeah. So it's quite difficult then because you, of course, you can't know that a pandemic is around the corner. You can't know that Russia is going to invade Ukraine and that's going to put pressure on the world supply of gas or grain or other things. Those are the completely unpredictable events, surely.
Unpredictable, yes, but the sort of role of the futures field is to ask the questions, what if this happens? What if it doesn't,
and how do we protect ourselves?
And then at least once you've started asking those questions, even if you're not making actual plans for it, because we can't plan for every contingency. All we'd be doing is planning. We'd not be doing anything. But at least then you've kind of thought about what could happen, and you have that in the back of your mind as something that might happen, and you're not so confident that those very beautiful laid out forecasts that fit so neatly into our little Excel sheets are the truth going forward.
So I've done some work around optimists and pessimists. And in reality, the pessimist is somebody that can foresee all the negative things happening. And it almost immobilizes them because if I'm going to go and get involved in this business, these are the things that can go wrong, so it's actually easier not to get involved.
Yeah.
An optimist will obviously see the opportunity in there and almost kind of discount the negative and the realities of what could happen. To be a futurist and an optimist, which you clearly are, I can tell from a few minutes into this conversation, must be quite a difficult balance because your job is to actually predict some of the things that can go wrong.
Yeah, so I think that I'm not a natural optimist at all. I'm very grumpy and very cynical by nature. But I have realized that like due to economic training and the fact that once you sort of have these realizations that expectations are self-fulfilling prophecies, that expectations do shape reality. There's reasons why central banks put out forecasts and things are to actually tame us and curate our behavior, right? You start to realize that being an optimist is almost then a moral duty, right? Because if you are a pessimist, all you are doing is is accelerating the odds of bad things happening.
So you
right?
make it happen.
So you kind of have to be. So reluctantly, I have realized that I'm a reluctant, pragmatic optimist, but there's different types of optimism. There's blind optimism, the sort of very Panglossian, this is the best of all possible worlds, the old Voltaire thing, sort of optimism, which is pretty useless, quite frankly, because it's not optimism backed by action. A more pragmatic sort of optimism is the optimism that forces you to act in an optimistic manner, which then sort of breaks those vicious cycles and makes them a bit more virtuous. I think this is a good sort of lesson, particularly for South Africans in the current political, economic climates and all the rest of it, and with the nice sort of escape hatches we have with things like cryptocurrencies and these abilities to opt out of our societies. But I think it is important to notice from quite a moral and ethical perspective that it is a duty to be optimistic in the society that you live and participate in. Let's just take your personal finances, right? Or your personal life. If you expect things to continue on a downward slope in South Africa, long, slow demise, short, sharp crash, whatever sort of type of pessimist you are, you're going to act accordingly, right? You're going to withhold your capital from investing in the property market, investing in local companies, and you're going to take that capital and invest it in international companies or stash it offshore somewhere. And what are you doing then? You're actually reducing quite a lot of that lifeblood that could compound into growth for new businesses and for existing businesses. Yeah. So you kind of become part of the problem by simply acting in your own perfectly rational self-interest based on your negative perceptions about where things are happening. And lo and behold, if everyone thinks in that direction, these small choices compound. The confidence declines, the investment declines, of course, the economy starts to lag then compared to other parts of the world. And guess what? The ones where we've sort of stashed our cash actually do better, which just compounds the gap even further. So you kind of have this moral obligation to invest in the world you want more of, right? And quite often we make choices based on hedging, like trying to reduce our risk, which is a very pessimistic view, right? So we try and protect our own, we put it into like a trust account in the Isle of Man, we take our stuff away, we send our children to university and other places. We don't invest in our local market. And then we're surprised or we all sort of like have a bit of schadenfreude about oh no, look, it was always going to go very down.
To
but you're part of the problem,
we made it
right?
happen is something
made it happen,
we don't look at. Yeah.
That's why I think the more exciting sort of people in the local economy are people that are backing optimism with action. And my favorite case study I always go back to, always give them a shout out, is the guys at Easy Equities and Easy Properties. Because what are they doing? They're encouraging people to invest in local stocks and in local property. And once you do that, that's an act of optimism. You invest in things because you hope, even if you don't necessarily believe, that they're going to grow in value going forward. And by doing that, you're retaining more capital here. But not only are you increasing the odds of that, whatever it is you invested in, doing better going forward, you also then have a good incentive, a virtuous incentive to actually support the society around that business and around that property, right? Because now you are invested in the success of those businesses that you've invested in. So you are more motivated, even on a very subconscious level, to make sure your society is peaceful and safe and has a good governance.
Yes, because you are invested.
Yes, exactly. You do the opposite. You take the cash offshore, and now you actually have or you invest in Bitcoin instead of investing in the Rand. Now you actually have a perverse incentive to see the Rand decline, because actually when the Rand and the South African economy tanks, in comparison, you actually get wealthier. So suddenly, by a simple act of hedging, a simple act of pessimism, you actually now have a perverse incentive to cheer on the decline of your own society.
So it encourages
and that's
negativity.
A very moral message. See, now I am sounding like a prophet, right?
You are a bit
I'm
of a
sorry.
prophet.
I'm sorry. I'm like ranting on a Wednesday morning.
Talk about a wolf in sheep's clothing. Jeez. But
didn't expect a sermon, did you?
No, I really didn't. Not today anyway. But it's fascinating because I always think the whole state capture thing, what really upsets me most about state capture, fine, if they stole the money, they stole the money, but spend it locally at least.
Yeah, exactly.
Imagine if those billions or trillions didn't go off to wherever they went and they actually were invested here.
Yeah.
At least it would be put back into our own economy. The problem is that it's gone. And I think that's, in a strange way, that's what you're actually saying.
Yeah, like you got to invest in what you want more of. If you want something to succeed, you invest in it. And we're talking investment, not just in terms of capital, but also in terms of attention and time and care and what you put into it, right? And we tend to think only about the downside. We are very pessimistic. Being an optimist is not a politically palatable, position to take. I mean, just look around. I mean, the place is literally burning, like everything's going wrong. And there's wars and there's climate change and there's ghastly fires. I mean, like, how can you possibly be an optimist in the space. But when you think about it a bit further, how can you possibly not? Like, I don't want to be. It's exhausting, right? Because you have to then do something about these things.
But don't we find that we're more optimistic if we, as you said, invest not even our money, but our time, our effort?
It's absolutely true.
I always look at people that are giving back in some way. They have found meaning in the environment that they live in. Those are the people that stay, that are actually happier, that are connected to the place and to themselves. Yeah. So it might be counterintuitive, but actually that's what gives us meaning. I mean, I always think of man's search for meaning. Yes, we're not in concentration camps. I get that. But the reality is that by finding meaning and investing in our environment and our society, we find happiness ultimately.
And those things compound, right? I mean, like by doing something, you're obviously helping someone else, which makes their lives a bit better, and on it goes, right? I mean, like these things do compound. But like, I think it's an important lesson for us to think about, especially if you have a bit of privilege in terms of having a bit of being lucky enough to be on the side of the line that during COVID got richer and more comfortable, rather than the side of the line that separated, because that's what we really saw. That was the big takeaway from COVID. Globally, we saw
I want
separation.
To talk about COVID because
hollowing out of the middle.
For a futurist, COVID must have been
very validating,
fantastic in a way.
Super validating. Because we felt very smart.
I was just going to say everything in terms of technology, in terms of access to services, remote working, all of these things changed our world in a way to some extent that you lot
had been talking about for years, and people telling us we're all crazy. Like I remember doing a presentation at Biz Community in 2018 talking about unreal estate. Right. Virtual real estate.
Yes,
and I was confronted with an audience of like 200 people looking at me with like shaking their heads like this woman is completely insane. And right now they've almost all lost money on NFTs, eh? Just saying.
Look, I have to say that it's not because I'm smart, just because I didn't understand it.
So it's a Darwinian kind of event, right? These hype cycles.
Absolutely. But and we can expect to see those continuing all the time, because we're always in search of the new best thing, the new big thing, aren't we?
We always are, and everyone's looking to get ahead, right? I mean, that's the really cynical thing behind this. We're all wanting a way to get more than what we actually deserve, or get more than the value, more of the value we put in to get out, right? Okay. Sort of the miracle of capitalism, the whole idea that's the only sort of free lunch we can get by sort of exchanging value.
Right.
But a lot of people have got caught up in the excitement, shall we say.
So how then do you, when you look at technologies and you look at NFTs, for example, the technology behind it's very interesting, and maybe that will be something that will outlast the monkey, the photo of the monkey, or the drawing of the monkey. But in order to identify which trends, especially technology-wise, are going to be interesting, what do you look at?
Well, you look at where things are happening not just in one place, where things are happening in multiple places. That's generally how you know it's going to be a sort of a deeper thing, right? So if it's only happening in one geographic location at one point in time, it's probably quite localized. But if you want to see things that are going to be changing, it's got to be in different geographies and at different times, right? So you want to actually see if there's a trend, that things are changing over time and getting more or getting less. So that's what you'd look for. But you also look for things that, if you want to look at the trends that are definitely going to stick around, you look at the technologies and the new ideas that feed into the base needs and desires of human beings that simply don't change over time. Need for security, the need
electricity.
For love, information.
We see what happens here in South Africa with load shedding, where renewable energy has grown by 300% in the last 2 months, the sales. So which makes sense, because our basic need is energy.
Energy is at the root of everything. So energy is obviously one to look at there, but so is our need for status and love, whether that's through sort of like, mating and dating sort of status, or whether that's sort of more economic status. A lot of what drives us is our desire to, as I said, get ahead of other people, and we often do that by looking at those ahead of us in the monkey bucket or the crab bucket, like one step ahead. And the guys at the top obviously try to stay away from us as far as possible, right? So you kind of look at how that sort of seething crab bucket is moving. You can also pick up quite a lot of interesting things.
The question always is, for me, is how to deal with the noise, because there's a tremendous amount of noise.
So much noise.
And I guess the people that'll get ahead are those that can listen for the sounds they're meant to listen to?
Yeah, I think that from my perspective, I think a lot of people that play in the futures space tend to focus on technology as being the leading indicator. I disagree quite fundamentally with that. I think technology is a lagging indicator and a very big distraction.
Okay,
and that the leading indicator is more about actually what drives people's changing mindset or what actually change things going forward. And because it's easy to track change in technology. It's exciting, right? There's a new toy, there's a new bell, there's a new whistle, there's always something new. But a lot of that is shiny. And you've got to ask the deeper questions behind that. What is the need this is really fulfilling? And then you start to see commonalities. And like some technologies are fulfilling very superficial needs, and others are fulfilling very, very deep ones, right? And that's when you can start to make sense of a lot of the chaos there. You've got to take a bit of a step back there. Yeah, it's too easy to get distracted.
Well, I guess it does make sense, because if I'm buying a computer, I'm buying a cell phone, the basic need is to be able to make a phone call. Why then would I buy an iPhone over something else? Is because they sell status. Need, right? They sell status, and that connects to a very real human need to elevate myself amongst my peers.
And the bigger, even deeper ones, like those need for sort of progress and evolution, right? Like we're always trying to do more with less. So are these technologies making things really more efficient, or are they just sort of distractions, right? So I think that's where you start to see the more fundamental changes that are taking place. And a lot of these things sort of haven't really changed all that much. Our basic needs, our basic desires haven't changed much. Our ability to fulfill them have become better.
We want to be safe, healthy, fed and loved and valued in our community.
Yes, and I think the one that we're starting to see movement in at the moment is the idea of meaning. I think the most fascinating trends at the moment are all to do with actually a little bit of the metaphysical. So we can pick this up in various different places. Like we look for like these bellwether moments that are like, aha, something's happening here. And we saw there was a psychedelic shaman at Davos this year. That's a pretty. No. They had like a psychedelic like experience
that
there.
That makes me very uncomfortable.
It really does. I mean, metaphysical economics. It's horrific. Yeah, there was a psychedelic. It's tangential, but have a look at it. Wow. It's becoming sort of mainstream.
So what does it say to you?
It says that people are running out of ideas, quite frankly, in the day-to-day basis.
Desperation.
It also shows that even if that sort of part of the world is looking for these more metaphysical experiences, looking for sort of deeper meaning, we've gone kind of too far in the direction of pure materialism, which is quite a big thing to talk about, but I always end up talking about these weird things. But you'll see the shift from the material towards the more sort of surreal taking place in all different spheres. And the other one that's maybe not as related directly, but when you start to connect the dots, you can kind of see that there's this sort of quest for meaning and the hollowness in people's lives, that we're looking now for meaning, not just for status and stuff, is we started to see corporates in America, which is quite leading. I mean, we all follow their culture and all the rest of it, now hiring spiritual consultants for their teams. So like we used to just get paid a paycheck and who cared? If you drop dead tomorrow, replace you by someone else and all the rest of it. Yeah. And then we started getting physical wellness programs in the workplace. Like your Discovery Vitality would come in and do a big pull-up banner drive and make sure everyone had their vitamins and their tests. Get a healthy workforce is good for the community. And then you had like your company sort of benefits for your health. And then they started doing it with finances too, because we realized that employees that were managing their money badly were distracted at work. So you have now like sort of financial wellness days at work.
I'm just going to, as you're saying it, I'm saying check. Check.
And now
we brought that to
so body, mind, and now we're going towards the sort of soul too, right? So we're seeing companies investing in spiritual consultants to help people find meaning in their work. And this ties into the trends I'm sure many people would have heard of in terms of like the great resignation and the lying down flat generation, people doing life audits and opting out of the rat race. And like, how do you reattract people to like be interested in like typing on the keyboards, like doing the human monkeys for you? So these ideas for seeking meaning and mystery are very interesting. And if you also look at the trends in terms of young people and their belief in things like astrology and how that's trending up. And the other very strange tipping point in that whole sort of surreal sort of space is what's happening with atheism, because we've seen like trends away from organized religion across most of the Western world. This is like not excluding parts of the Middle East where, of course, those sort of religions haven't seen those sorts of declines. But still, basically what we've seen is huge trends towards atheism, but we've also seen the birth rates in in places trending towards atheism declining faster than in places that have more religious meaning. And what we're heading towards is what we're calling the nun cliff. So we call these people the nuns that don't believe in anything, although they do tend to believe in things like psychedelic experiences, astrology.
Because they're looking for meaning.
So as Terry Pratchett says, there's so much belief in the world, right? And NFTs and the price of Bitcoin, right? Exactly. So the amount of belief slushing around is always the same. Just we attach onto different things. But anyway, in terms of organized religion, sort of heading towards this nun cliff, are we going to suddenly see a huge drop-off in the percentage of this trend that's trending up, more people becoming atheists and less people believing?
And then it'll change
because of the birth rate.
Absolutely.
And if you look at the projections, it's like literally a cliff. So that's a very interesting point there. But I love that idea of a sort of belief slushing
atheists
around.
might become extinct is really what you're saying.
Yeah. Like it ties together with nihilism, right? Or nihilism.
As a rule.
Yeah, they're not optimists. There's like it's fundamentally like the not believing in life after death. It's a fundamentally pessimistic position, right? So it kind of ties in with the whole thesis I'm talking about. It's interesting to kind of see how all these things
It really is
together.
Fascinating.
So those are the trends I'm interested in. Like these are deep social trends.
But that's important because what you're saying is it isn't simply about the technology or the latest thing, but really a reflection on where we are as humans.
Yeah.
And once we understand that and what our drivers are and what we are attracted to, everything else follows that. And that's how you would follow trends.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like a lot of the technology trends now we're seeing are about people looking for meaning and looking for connection in increasingly desperate ways. So to a large extent, technology is not a great substitute for human connection. And in fact, it's a quantity versus quality thing. And I think one of the more interesting sort of anecdotal case studies that came out of the NHS in the UK during COVID was looking at older people and the baby boomer and silent generations. That would be people that are sort of in their sort of 50s, 60s, 70s over there. And they tracked them. They did like a whole lot of sort of qualitative and quantitative studies looking at how people were responding to loneliness during COVID, obviously. I mean, people are locked down away from their families. And what they found was that amongst those older generations, those who had had video calls with their families were more lonely than those that only had telephonic calls. So it's kind of like this sort of salt water for thirst idea, right? Like we're drinking more and more, but we're getting less and less satisfaction. And it's actually kind of killing us. And a little bit is actually worse than nothing at all, which is fascinating, right? So we got this quantity, we don't have the quality. And the other sort of big social trend that I'm looking at, because I think it has huge implications for political and economic stability going forward, is the rise of virginity among particularly young men. If you see how people in their 60s are having more sex than 18 to 30-year-old men, it's quite something. This is talking about that whole incel generation. This is a generation of lonely, angry, quite frankly, horny young men.
And people who don't know how to connect to other people.
And don't know how to connect to other people.
Right.
The trends are extraordinary if you start to see that.
Absolutely amazing. But
it ties into also falling off fertility rates.
Right. I was going to wrap it all up, but I don't know how to wrap it up with that image of these 18-year-old men. So so let's wrap it up with something positive.
Yeah.
South Africa is not an easy place at the moment, but it's a place of great opportunity.
Absolutely.
What is the opportunity that you see?
Well, all these things, if they seem kind of dark to you or light, I mean, all these trends have a good and a bad side to them. There's opportunities in them. There's problems in them. But every problem is a business opportunity, quite frankly. So,
100%.
if you're looking for places of growth, you need to look at places that are literally growing. And then your eyes have to turn to Africa. Europe is in a degrowth cycle right now. Quite frankly, degrowth means they're having less children, which means their population pyramids are turning into quite precarious looking pagodas, right? They are moving away from economic growth towards things like donut economics and deliberate policies towards actually making themselves poorer rather than richer. There's a great sense of them sort of drawing up the drawbridges and retreating to sort of live off the rations of the past rather than actually going out and farming and hunting. And that's a huge opportunity. And it's a huge opportunity for optimistic societies. Europe is descending into a period of pessimism. They literally, those ideas around degrowth and around protectionism and redistribution rather than growth and progress are fundamentally pessimistic sort of, worldviews. And there's a huge opportunity for more optimistic nations who are still literally having babies. I mean, that's the biggest act of optimism you can have, actually, is to have a child. So,
absolutely. And so we end as we began.
Right.
Be fruitful and multiply.
Be fruitful and multiply, and be optimistic. It's a competitive advantage at this point.
And that was the Sunday sermon.
That was your Sunday sermon. Thank you.
With Bronwyn Williams, economist and futurist. That was absolutely delightful. I'm Howard Feldman. This has been an episode of Synthesis TV.